Instead, we're going to talk about Elf Only fans.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Dungeons & Degrees. My name's Adrian.
And I'm Alex.
And today we have a special guest. Special guest, introduce yourself.
Hi there, I am Noah Diamond. I am one of the original Dimension 20 editors.
Yes.
Now former.
Wow.
Yeah. Still doing some editing work currently, correct?
I'm focusing more on assistant editing right now. Actually, I've been pushing into the broadcast television world, so I've kind of shifted those gears to take on those kind of shows that I don't have as much of the editorial experience for.
Gotcha. I wanted to talk about editing, and then we'll kind of get into your current projects, kind of like the flow of kind of work and how you kind of got where you are now.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess before you started with Dimension 20 and the current works, what were you doing?
Immediately before, I was at the time I was working for Viacom in their digital department, which has changed a lot since then. But at the time, they had like a large digital team that kind of worked on content for all the different brands. So I was doing a lot of stuff. This was assistant editing for Comedy Central and TV and VH1 logo, stuff like that. We're doing mostly like supplemental sidecar content, pre-shows, post-shows, behind the scenes. Comedy Central did a lot of like original, like short form digital sketch comedy on like the YouTubes on their YouTube channel and stuff like that. That was my first big job in Los Angeles, and it was actually really fantastic. It's a kind of a really great launch pad. I've sent a few other people there since I've left because they really run you through the ringer. It's such a variety of content and platforms and workflows. I was doing stuff for Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, website, a little bit of broadcast, Musical.ly back before it was TikTok. Yeah. We were doing original content for Musical.ly. And so, you come out of there like just with a really strong understanding of workflow and a very padded resume, because you just put each of those little projects as a separate, no one knows that that's all the same job. I mean, it doesn't matter that it is. So like I said, I've sent a few people there. So I had been there for about 2 years and was looking to leave. But the problem with those golden handcuff jobs is even when you're done with them, it's really hard to find something worth leaving for because of just the long termness of it. Mm-hmm. And so there was a job listing. It didn't say it was for College Humor, but for whatever reason, I knew that Big Breakfast was the production company behind College Humor. I'm not sure where that information got in my brain, but I saw an ad for a Big Breakfast thing, and I was like, "Oh, that's College Humor." And I applied for that, and that was supposed to be like 2 to 3 months at the time. That was the job listing. It was like 2 to 3 months. Editing a D&D show or a tabletop show. And they said in the job listing, like, include your experience. So I put like just a giant paragraph of here's my history with it. And then at the end, I was like, also, I know how to use Premiere and I can edit stuff, whatever. And at the time I knew one of the assistant editors working at College Humor at the time. And I hit her up, and I knew an editor, Andy Young, who had cut the first batch of Actually. I didn't know that at the time, but he had cut the first batch of Actually. So I hit him up, and I hit my assistant editor friend up, Brittany Joyner. I got them to throw in, some words for me, when I applied, pulled those industry connections as best I could, and went in. It was probably the best job interview of my life because, I mean, on the one hand, going to a job interview when you've got a job is such an empowering experience. It like really kind of helps shift those power dynamics, and so it's not that, oh, I'm going here because I need work, please hire me. It kind of lets you do that. Like they always say, like, oh, when you go to a job interview, you should be interviewing the employer as much as they're interviewing you, and that kind of helped make that a little bit more of a reality. Mm-hmm. Because I didn't need them. I wanted them, but I didn't need them.
Yeah.
So I went in. I went in. I talked about. I was in and editing a D&D podcast at the time, which we're fairly shallow in at the time, probably. So I was like, I'm already kind of doing, it's audio only, but I'm doing the stuff you're looking for. They seemed to like me, and, they brought me on to edit Fantasy High at the time. It was not called Dimension 20 at the time. It was called, I think they were calling it Adventure Dome at the time. They changed that for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
And we had to edit that out. Because when Aaron and I started, they were at the tail end of filming the show. Mm-hmm. I don't remember exactly. I know they hadn't filmed the finale yet. It might have been the finale and like an episode or two before that. They were still wrapping up. And so we had to actually edit out every time that Brennan said Adventure Dome in the intro, because the space was going to be called the Adventure Dome.
Right.
Mhm.
That was the whole
That
idea
makes
for the
sense.
anthology. It was like,
Yeah.
yeah, and so he opened every episode with "Welcome to the Adventure Dome," and we had to nix all of those. Some of the rare times we've removed content from episodes of Dimension 20, which obviously we've talked about many times. We try and avoid whenever we can.
Yeah, that's awesome. I do like this this presentation of you talking about how, like, using your connections and your past experience and the that's interview tactic of you're interviewing them versus them interviewing you, because it's something that not a lot of people, like, when they first get into jobs, don't really know about. And some people are just like super nervous and just like, I don't know what to do, am I going to mess up or anything. Like, to have that mentality shift, it's like, okay, let's see what they say.
I also had that because it was a Facebook job post, and I normally hate doing this, but comment like, oh, I applied, and you just comment on it, and I now endorse this tactic just because of this experience, which was like, must have been like 10 different people I knew all like replied to my comment being like, oh, you gotta hire Noah, he's really great,
Awesome.
and this and that, and that was brought up in the job. They brought up Andy and they brought up Brittany, and then they brought up like, oh yeah, all these people were replying to your thing saying how great you were. And so I was like, as much as I like, whenever I see a job post, all these people being like, oh, I emailed you, or oh, check your spam folder, because if they're asking for Facebook messages,
Yeah,
that others, which I never do, because I'm like, look, if they're looking, they're looking. But I'm like, it's I guess there is a reason to do that, because and I've definitely made sure to return that favor. When I see people I like, I'm like, oh yeah, you got to hire them. Or if I've had some people be like, hey Noah, can you? I just applied for this job. Can you make a little comment on there to give me a little profile bump? Just a little nudge on the algorithm.
Yeah.
I think it's that and being fast is what, like, because Viacom I also got from a Facebook post, and I was the first person to reply, and I replied, and the person who ended up being my boss replied to my comment being like, oh, I saw it or whatever like that. He didn't reply to anybody else's comments on that Facebook post, and I obviously was the one that got the job. I don't know what kind of correlation there is between those two things, but I gotta look at that data and be like, well, something's going on there.
Yeah, something positive is happening.
I've been an assistant, right, where we look through interviews, and as the assistant, like, oh yeah, I'm going to creep hardest on the first couple of ones that come in and be like, this person can go, like, this doesn't look good. So I could see the benefit of getting in early, because
definitely in general, yeah, because you're gonna get the fatigue, yeah. In general, yeah, and like that's why, like, what is it? Staff Me Up, when you pay, they bump you to the top. They bump your resume to the top, because they all know that being at the top of the stack matters. But I think it was specifically being first to like reply on that Facebook that was like such an interesting little occurrence. But yeah, both Viacom was also supposed to be like a 3-month gig, just like and both of those jobs I ended up being at for 2 years each. Viacom, they brought me in for, it was the summer. They like had a lot of stuff ramp up. In particular, they did a sketch series every year. That was the last year they did it. I hope that's not my fault. For Red's Apple Ale, like sponsored like a sketch comedy series. Red Social Scene. They're very funny, but unfortunately, because they're branded, they only stayed up during the summer, which really is, they had like Paul Scheer and Colton Dunn. I think Nicole Byer was on like we did a few things with Nicole Byer before she blew up. That's Nicole Byer and Lizzo. We both like did stuff with before they were famous. I'm proud of that. There's a few people like that, and so they brought me on for that show. And then like I was like in July, I was like, hey, can we talk about like my rap date so I can start working on my next job? And he's like, yeah, we'll talk when things slow down. And 2 years later, I quit.
Things never slowed down. They just kept going.
Yeah, and likewise, College Humor, they're like 2 to 3 months, which, I mean, to begin with, it took us way longer than that. College Humor was going through a lot of growth with Dropout, and Dropout was not public information at the time. They were going through a lot of growth, and they had never worked on content of that scale. And I think that there was a lot of like, oh, this is a lot more work than we anticipated. Yeah. So it took us much longer than 2 to 3 months to cut. I mean, we were still putting the final touches on Fantasy High when the show was airing, which is not unusual for television, but was not the plan. So that was September, and we started in February. So that took about 7 months to cut the show, and then by that point they had already greenlit season 2. Because as soon as it launched, they were like, oh, this show is huge, and we need to keep moving. Right. So much so that while we were working on season 2 and season 1 was wrapping up airing, they were like, oh, we can't wait for you to finish season 2. We need to put out more content. We need to put out more Dimension 20, which is when they had been talking about doing the one shots or the side quests, but that was when they like no, the talk was like to do one after Unsleeping City, and they're like, no, we're doing one now. Doing a side quest today, and they brought in 2 new editors, and they shot Escape from the Bloodkeep over a weekend, and the editors, Emily and JB cut it in just blazingly fast time. Absolutely ridiculous turnaround. I do not envy them. And and they went in cold. They never cut the show. It was an entirely new experience for them, and they had to just hit the ground running. And they cranked out Bloodkeep while we were finishing Unsleeping City, so that it could air shortly after Fantasy High finished, and then it would give us more time to finish Unsleeping City. So they definitely saw it was that they had done something pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. That Dimension 20 was going to be a big thing, and it's last time I heard it was fully half the views on Dropout were Dimension 20. Half the views on Dropout were Dimension 20, and then also like Dimension 20 watchers watch the most other content on Dropout.
Oh, that's kind of interesting.
Like WTF 101 was very successful in terms of raw views, but WTF 1 watchers didn't watch much else other than WTF 101. They came in, they watched that show, and they didn't really grab onto the platform. Whereas Dimension 20 fans really, engage with Dropout as a whole.
Gotcha. That's interesting that you have those kind of like the entry level of like who's watching and the statistics of where they jump to and whatnot.
I have no idea if that's proprietary information or if I just am. If Sam's going to call me and be like, "No, what the fuck?" But it's out there now. It's out there. Sharing our metrics.
Yeah,
I think they'd shared that the half the views number before.
Okay.
I think that's
let me know what you need to cut. I will cut it.
No, I don't. What are they going to do? Fire me?
Yep, that's it. And be like, back pay. What are we going to do?
Yeah. They have asked me to come back a few times since the layoffs. I've just had so much other stuff going on that, and as much as I miss working on it, it's just, I know, from a pragmatic or even cynical perspective, like I don't gain anything from cutting more Dimension 20. Mm-hmm. Like it doesn't propel me, and so I would do it like if I had the time, if I was in between stuff, and I had, I would love to do more Dimension 20. It's such a wonderful show to work on. It's such an amazing team and fan base, and I miss not doing, I miss doing it rather. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I'm like, I gotta keep moving forward.
Yeah. So like you kind of Viacom for 2 years, Dimension 20 Dropout for 2 years. How does you propel into the next thing with these like 2 years of kind of working in these jobs?
So yeah, I came out, I've ironically been for a long time very afraid of doing freelance work, which was I've always said it's a bad position to be in, for my career. But I've also been really lucky to like land a bunch of long-term gigs. Like before Viacom, I was 9 months at a little news web startup. That was my first job in Los Angeles. They brought me in to fill in for someone who was out of town for a week, and then they fired him and kept me on, which was awkward because they didn't tell him, and he came to walk into his office after his vacation or trip or whatever, and I was there. Not a good company. Not a good. That should have been my first red flag. I ignored it, and I stayed there for 9 months before getting Viacom. And then before that, I was like a year and a half back in San Francisco. It was a job I got at the tail end of college, actually postponed my graduation a bit to work. It was this start, or not, well, they call themselves a start. This comedy label called Rooftop Comedy. They put out albums, and their other big thing was they had cameras in comedy clubs all across the country, and they recorded the sets there and would cut out, and so we would go through that footage and kind of curate and cut it out. And they'd sell the recordings back to the comics to like build their reels and stuff like that. And then they'd also license it to like Pandora, and Audible was the big one, who Audible ended up buying the company because they were, Audible has their whole channels feature now, like all that content. And they acquired us during development of that to kind of acquire the library of comedy content for those. So I was there for like a year and a half. When my job ended there, I was on unemployment and used that kind of to, motivate my move to Los Angeles. So I've been very lucky to kind of have this run of long-term jobs of really not having to hunt and peck for freelance work. But coming out of College Humor, I was like, I got to bite that bullet. And I got, especially because every time I was, every time I had a place for 2 years, like a year, and I'm like, I got to get out of here. I got to do something else. I got to keep moving. And I'd spend another year trying to find something worth leaving for. even college, even though while I was enjoying working at college, I was like, I gotta do something else. I've cut 3 seasons of this show, or however, I need new opportunities. So that's kind of been a big commitment. I actually turned down. I got earlier this year offered a 1 to 2 year long union assistant editing job on a very cool looking show, and I ended up reluctantly passing on it because of the duration, and it wasn't quite I very much picked the direction I was aiming in things. I'm like, oh, that's a very cool show that like 2 years ago I would have been so loved to have been part of it. Like now it's not where I want to be going. And I've been fortunate. Things have worked out pretty well. I've jumped a few jobs since leaving College Humor. I booked an 11-month long union show that started right at the beginning of the pandemic. I was 4 days in the office before we switched to work from home. That worked out incredibly well for me. That's a great time to get 11 months of union work. And I'm closing out this year on I'm on my third scripted comedy for a major distributor. This has all been work as an assistant editor, but I'm looking back at the year, but like, oh dang, I'm pulling this off. I've had, since moving to Los Angeles, 1 month that I've been unemployed, and that was the beginning of this year, when I wrapped off that union show before I landed something else while I was just looking. And that's kind of been my thing. I'm like, oh, wow, okay. I'm terrified of freelancing, but clearly I'm doing all right. Clearly I can find work. It helps that right now, the market is very saturated with jobs. I think it's a big boom post-COVID. It's people cannot, there's not enough people. I don't want to call it a labor shortage but it's a work surplus. So, and people are having a hard time filling jobs. So it's there's so much work out there right now that's definitely helping a lot.
I could see that happening, especially since we just got out of COVID. Well, got out of COVID. And all of the creativity, all of the projects that got started, and we got started in the middle of the pandemic because we had
time,
nothing else better to do,
Exactly.
and we had time.
Yeah, I mean the show I just wrapped on, which is actually Adam Conover's new show. In the show he even goes like, this show is supposed to come out a year ago, and we never even were able to film it because of COVID. I spent the last few months working on that show, which was a lot of fun and very cool. And and that was on pure coincidence. I didn't even call Adam to get that job. I just happened to get it, and then I was like, hey Adam, I'll see you at the office.
That's pretty great. Impressive journey, especially you saying I hate freelance, and then you're able to kind of keep moving things, keep grabbing these positions of long-term work, which is super awesome.
I don't know how I did it. People kept asking for advice. I'm like, I don't know. It just kept happening. And even the Audible one, that was a 3-month internship. That was an internship, an underpaid internship. And I was looking at quitting that job. He was like, oh, and then they got acquired by Audible, and they were like, all right, all the interns are now employees, making $15 an hour, which was a ton of money at the time. That's minimum wage in San Francisco now, but
I mean, especially where you're from, when you come from an intern position, it's just like, oh wow, I can not worry about eating a little bit.
That branch doesn't even exist anymore, because they were paying us, I think, $500 every 2 weeks as interns, which I was in the very privileged position of I could afford, to take that. Which, I mean, that's the problem with under and unpaid internships, is it filters out the applicants to the people who can afford to be working for free or working for little to no money, and that's a huge problem. That's my endorsement or unendorsement of those hiring practices.
Gotcha. And you kind of talked a little bit about that you had a D&D podcast when you were kind of jumping into editing Dimension 20. What is that project?
That's called Danger Town. We did one season. There's been talk of doing a second. We'll see. It's hard to put together a podcast, y'all. And that was just something done with some film friends of mine, led by Austin Smigalski, who is someone I have a long creative relationship with. He wrote and directed the feature film that I cut a few years ago, and a few other film friends of us. And we had put together a D&D group. And so I had just gotten into 5th edition. I hadn't played much tabletop in a very long time, and not much D&D. And we were getting into that, and we were like, oh, we should do a podcast. We're funny and engaging people. And so, we were filming a podcast or recording a podcast called Danger Town, and I was doing most of the editing. I think a few other people did. And once I started on Dimension 20, I fell back on the editing. We actually brought in some other post-production friends to cut a few episodes and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, it's a very different beast than Dimension 20. We did a little bit of music because we brought in a composer friend of ours to do like the theme and stuff like that, but we weren't really doing sound design. We ended up doing that later, kind of inspired by Dimension 20, ironically enough. But the cutting of the D&D content and what they were really looking for at College Gamer was people who would understand the D&D stuff. I think they were much, like even when I talked about me on my email, was a ton of here's my tabletop experience, and then also I can use the software.
Right.
Which I mean, in that my editor at Viacom, the editor I worked very closely with when I was getting ready for this interview, was like, anyone, when you go into an interview as an editor, like, don't talk about how you can cut it. Anyone can cut it. They want someone that the personality is what you're selling, not the technical skill, because everyone knows how to use the editing software. Any person off the street could just put the show together, but it's the passion and the energy and the enthusiasm for the content that you need to sell, which is exactly what they were looking for. And they wanted people who could decipher what the hell was going on, which I'm a big rules lawyer, and so I was able to, and especially because we got very little information about a lot of the stuff, and Aaron would very be like, hey, they're referencing this thing. What is this thing they're talking about? Is that a class feature? Is that a feat? Is that a spell? And I'd be like, oh, that's this thing. And especially when we got into A Crown of Candy, when we started, putting their character sheets
right
on the screen, and we got scans of their character sheets, but they just list everything in that little tiny box in the bottom right. Mm-hmm. And we had like the feet section and what that and so they were like, okay, I had to sit down and be like, okay, what is this thing that they say here? Is this a racial feature? Is this a class feature? Is this a feat? Is this a magic item? To kind of parse that all out so that we could figure out what needed to go where on those character splash pages. We got, we did so much, like, I don't remember if she talked about it on your podcast, but I know Aaron's talked about it before. Like, in season 1, we weren't given any of their hit points. And so we had just a giant spreadsheet, and we had to like reverse engineer their hit points for every episode based on like, and like based on track how much damage they're down here, so they're at 0 here, so that's the amount of hit points. So their hit points are between this and this. Oh, they say they're at 20 hit points here. Okay, and we had to, and then also Ali, use the inspiring leader feat at the beginning. Okay, and then how much, and so just we had like really relatively complex spreadsheets to really track all those hit points, and be like, oh, what the hell is it? And meanwhile, the graphics don't even show the numbers; it just shows the percentages. But we were like, I don't know about Aaron, but like I would type in into those percentages, I'd be going down to like the 100th place on it. I was like, I'm getting these as accurate as I possibly can for this 100 pixel wide or however wide health bar. And then it got really complicated in Unsleeping City when we had the negative hit points, the hit point max reduction, and temporary hit points and healing, and and it was just like, and the spreadsheet got so complicated, and the After Effects project files for the number of elements we had to play with, and then we had wild shaping too on top of that,
and then changing all that hit point stuff too.
And it's like, how do we want to deal with this? It was a beast, and we had to check them, and sometimes they got the math wrong, and we're like, okay, which direction do we err? Mm-hmm. If we want to be as accurate as possible, but if they think they're unconscious because they got math wrong, at the end of the day, they are playing the game where they're unconscious, and we have to roll with that information. So we kind of try and find a middle ground between accuracy to the math and accuracy to the narrative that ended up happening at the table, and kind of split the difference.
It's tough to keep a hold of a lot of that numbers, especially since when you started editing Fantasy High, they had already every other episode they level up, so you're not getting any of those numbers when they get new HP amounts, and it's that's a lot of reverse engineering.
I think we got their character sheets from the first session, if I recall correctly. They took photos of those, and we kept asking and in future seasons we got more kind of snapshots of their character sheets.
Gotcha.
But also sometimes they just someone would just run in with their phone and just take pictures at the table, and I can't read this.
Running past blurry photos everywhere.
They're juggling. We went down to set because they were filming Dimension 20 in the building at the time, and there's so much going on that set. It is an impressive production. Especially with the old dome. The new dome now is not actually a dome; it's just some panels behind them. But the original dome, you've seen that behind the scenes video. That was a full friggin' dome that
inside the office building, right?
Yeah, inside the office building, right next to the actually set. our little sound stages.
That's awesome.
That is a beautiful set, though. I'm still obsessed with it.
Yeah, I missed they built those panels for senior or for sophomore year for the live show, and then they kind of ended up adopting those as the full look of the show. Moving forward, it's much more practical, but it's there's a certain level of not commitment, but like unnecessary extra credit, I guess, in making it an actual dome instead of a dome-like backdrop.
Right. Yeah, just a lot of like
you gotta love.
Yeah, exactly.
Rick Perry and his team just always go above and beyond.
Oh yeah.
I actually don't know how directly involved in the dome specifically Rick Perry was, so I maybe shouldn't give him credit for that. I think he did the sketches that I saw at the very least.
Yes, he has the sketches. So we had him on too, and I didn't really know. So I'm new to the Dimension 20. Adrian got me to watch it last year, so I watched Fantasy High. I watched the first season last year. I just now realized how far behind I actually was. Like I knew I was behind, but not. But once we talked to Rick Perry, and then I looked at his portfolio, I about died about just the amount of effort that went into any of that production. And now talking to you of like, oh, there is another aspect that there's another detail that we don't think about, but came in seamlessly, like looking and watching the video of seeing, just the character hit points. Well, for me, I'd be like, yeah, of course they give you that information. That makes sense. No, you had to go and do some more math, and then
they got better about it after Fantasy High. We made a fuss about it because Fantasy High was very much more a seat of their pants. And like I said, we weren't brought on until the end, so that those things weren't being considered at the time. They didn't know what the graphics were going to be. We're talking about they were going to be portraits. They were going to be pie charts. They were going to be like they hadn't figured out what any of that stuff was,
right?
Or what they even wanted. I don't even know when a conversation of hit point graphics came up because no other D&D show does that. Which I think Dimension 20 really did a lot of things that weren't being done in actual play, which is kind of wild to think about. Between the minis and the graphics and the sound design and stuff. I mean, there's some stuff like I know like the Critical Role or Geek and Sundry had done like the celebrity D&D, with Vin Diesel and stuff like that, and that had some really cool sound design. But that was like a special thing. That was like a sponsored thing where they sunk some money into it and they built that cool misty kind of room that they all played in. It was an exception, I guess, not the norm.
Right. It was something special, not like you said, and just the as another actual play. Like it's the people are just trying to get into that space. You had to stick out to make an impression on other viewers. What's going to stop other people going from my normal actual play to this new one? Like what's going to stand out opposed to they're all just talking and playing D&D. What's special?
I mean, the other magic thing, like at the end of the day, we get so much praise, for the minis and for the sound and stuff, but at the end of the day, the magic ingredient at the time was Brennon. I do think with the Flash got people, but Brennon, and he's no longer the magic ingredient, which I think is so wonderful. They're bringing in all these other DMs, but he very much set the course for the types of stories that are told by Dimension 20 and the way that Dimension 20 tells stories, even when he's not the one telling them anymore. That I think is another unique thing about the show. That those types of rich narratives. Not that other people don't tell, but the style of rich narratives that I cover my ass, man. That style of rich narratives is also very unique, under the hood,
of course,
to Dimension 20.
What is your own involvement like? And you might be very busy. Do you have any time to play your own games or anything like that, or you have a long-term game right now?
Not lately. I was in the mod game that Aaron mentioned. That our wonderful mod captain Wolf runs. I was in that, but my last show, Adam Conover's new show, had me working a lot later than my previous shows had been work from home, which so it's a lot easier to you're here. There's no drive home, and also work's a little slow. Whatever. I can play some Dungeons and Dragons. I finished more like I finished everything for the day.
Yeah.
Whereas Adam's show was in office. We were working in a facility. Which was is still unusual. My new show is work. I'm back to work from home again, but so between hours being later, and I'm there even when work is done. I'm there to support that in case they need anything. And so I hadn't made it for a while. I was actually retiring a character to bring in a new character, so they retired that character, and then just my new character never showed up. Whoops, which is similar kind of to what happened in Brennon was running a D&D game for the College Humor staff
right
after Fantasy High, and my character died in the last session. And I was gonna make a new character, and then they started filming on Sleeping City, and we're like, okay, we're gonna put a pause on the Office D&D game, and we'll resume it when things slow down. This is a theme. When things slow down, we'll resume the Office D&D game. And there was never a point in time when Brennan was not working on another season of Dimension 20 after that point. Gotcha. Once they introduced the concept of the side quests, he became. I mean, you go look at the sketch output. He wasn't writing sketches anymore. I think he was barely even acting in them as much as he now and then, but not nearly as much as when we were working. When we were doing post on Fantasy High, and he was just around, not doing anything else. Or doing stuff as a College Humor cat. He was just a College Humor cast member. But once on Sleeping City and Bloodkeep, Dimension 20 was 90% of his workload.
Yeah.
I guess he did a lot of other stuff, but you watch those seasons. You watch young, fresh faced Brennan in Fantasy High, and you go watch a Crown of Candy, which is kind of the tail end of this first arc before everything stops for the layoffs and COVID. Yeah. And man, he's at a different energy level, different wavelength. College Humor put Brennan through the ringer, and he loved it. He loved every second of it. He would never say no because he loved what he was doing so much. And Izzy at one point was like, he'll just never stop. He'll just never stop. I'm really worried. Like, as long as they let him work on D&D shows, he's just gonna do it constantly, and will never not be doing it. He needs to sleep at some point. And I'm glad. Once again, a reason I'm glad that they're bringing other DMs. Brennan can sleep some now.
That's what the Unsleeping City was based on, was the fact that he wasn't getting any sleep.
That was the beginning. That was the beginning of that. Unsleeping City was the last time Brennan slept.
It was his cry for help.
Yeah, please.
No, but that's the thing is he loved every second of it. The mind of Brendan Lee Mulligan is something else. And it never stops, and as long as people are willing to throw fuel at it, he's so happy to crank this stuff out. He's having the time of his life, so
it's very apparent. I mean,
Alex, you had mentioned like just how many seasons there were. You'd realize, and like it is, and that's remarkable. That now he's been able to put out now that they have new DMs and. It's even been a few seasons since this happened, but there was a moment where I realized that I've now cut a minority of seasons of Dimension 20, which I think the 7 actually might have with this something around one of these recent seasons. Like, I've no longer I've cut less than 50% of the seasons of this show, which was kind of like, oh man, I had a little bit of like an existential, my legacy is diminishing, my impact. On the show. I mean, probably if all these new seasons have been so much shorter. If you do it by hours, I'm sure I have a bigger share. But it was kind of a once again talking about like how much I wish I could go back and do more of it. I'm like, I'm fading away into the distance. I only like every time I look back, I feel like it was 2 years and we were cranking these shows. And I felt like I did so much, but I only did 4 seasons of Dimension 20. Mm-hmm. I did Fantasy High, Unsleeping City, Tiny Heist, and A Crown of Candy. When you list it out like that, it feels like a blip.
But it's not. You laid the foundational groundwork. I mean, just
that's what I try and remember. Yeah, it's like at the end of the day, like I germinated it. Everything that came after, but they've changed. I mean, the format of the show is, especially with the COVID stuff, the format of the show has changed very dramatically too. Though, with the split screens, and they've changed the way they've done graphics, and it's a constantly evolving beast, which I think is actually really fantastic. And now Aaron's gone too, so the entire that original guard we're both gone now. Mm-hmm. She's doing great things. I'm very excited for her. She's over at Warner Animation. I think I can say that. I won't say the show, but she's over at Warner Animation. And she's editing, which is really. And Andy actually is over at Warner Animation too. He's working on he's editing. Harley Quinn, which is really cool.
Nice.
And they finally they have a whole connection because she talked about she worked on the Harmontown documentary, and he was in the Harmontown documentary because he was he interviewed Dan Harmon for a part of it. And so I kept trying to get, because they like knew each other through that, and like they still haven't met, but now they've been on like company calls because they're both at Warner Animation. It's like eventually their paths will officially cross.
Yeah,
but that's the weird small world that we work in. I made a post on Instagram about the HBO Max show that Izzy's on, the Sex Lives of College Girls, and one of my friends was like, "Oh, Kelsey's assistant editing on that." I was like, "Oh, I know Kelsey. Like everything is connected. Everyone knows everybody. You can't escape it."
That's why he's not trash talking anybody while he's here.
That's exactly why I'm not trash talking anybody while I'm here. 100%. 100%. I don't
gotta keep those connections fresh.
It always becomes weird when you see people like bashing a new release on social media and stuff like that. It's like I'm like, I know people like, I'm like, oh, not that. Yeah, I don't want to like go and be like, oh, this was terrible, and then like someone's like, I fucking worked on that. Like that is 100% a reality in my life, that someone could just pop up that I know or that knows someone I know that like worked on a thing that I'm bashing. So I'm like, I try and be careful and diplomatic and kind and empathetic when talking about media.
That feels like a wild concept, though, that you have to actively be kind. Like that's not just a default for a lot of people.
Well, I think it's just so easy to forget that people are on the other side of things. I mean, you see it happen with parasocial relations, but even with with something, when you're watching like a major feat, it becomes so much more abstracted. The people that worked on it than a piece of a podcast or other type of media that are about the people working on it. And so you'd be like, oh yeah, I thought this sucked, but like people put their heart and souls into this thing. So I try and keep that in mind.
Of course, yeah. And I don't know, from what I've seen through like individuals who work in like media, TV, and shows like that, they're always just like, if someone has a comment who's like not in that realm, they're like, well, you got to understand like all the nuances and everything, and they're just like, as like an unlearned individual who doesn't know what goes on behind the scenes, they just don't see that. They just see the finished product.
There was a big thing about that, with Bohemian Rhapsody. That there's that video that went viral of someone be like, oh, here's how bad the editing is in Bohemian Rhapsody. Look at this scene. And it started going around in some editor groups and stuff that I'm in. And first of all, like, I know the editor of, I don't know him. Sorry, I know that the editor of that movie was in some of those groups. But I know a lot of people who are like, you don't know what the hell went on. You don't know what the coverage was. You don't know the politics of the room. The politics of the room. You don't know the kind of stuff they're trying to fix. That was a really messy, complicated production. With the Bryan Singer stuff and the change in directors. And people always be like, oh, because it won the Oscar for best editing. It's like, that's because people knew what the hell was going on. Not even, like it was best recovery in editing more than anything. And whenever people talk about editing, it's like, I'm biased, but like whenever people are like, oh, that scene was so badly cut, or that was such a bad edit there, I'm like, I always hesitate to blame the editor. I'm like, oh, well, who knows what the coverage on that scene was, what they had to work with, what the director or producers were like, oh, we should do it this way. And the editor was like, no, that's a terrible. And they're like, we want to do it this way. And, and then you get, Brian Mills jumping over a fence with 30 cuts or, what have you. I'm always reluctant to be like, oh, that person's a bad editor, because it's such a process.
Yeah. There's more to it than just what everyone sees.
Yeah. I was watching some video essay about something, and the person was like, oh, the editor keeps deciding to do this. And I'm like, well, hold on now.
Yeah. They're probably the only person that has the full view of whatever could be possible. And then you're listening to 1,000 different voices. Because I'm sure that's fun and easy and like super relaxing, because
yeah, that are really, it's just everyone's work comes together in the edit. It's kind of really that magical time when everything comes concatenated. They say, like a film story is told 3 times, when it's written, when it's directed, and when it's edited.
Gotcha. I think that like the work that goes into it is very like because we've just talked about like how people just immediately just dismiss it as bad. It's not like thanked a lot. So like because like nobody really thinks about it. They just see the medium and they're like, it's good or bad. They don't see the nuances in between.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like, thank you, Noah.
That was a real, like, I mean, editing is called like the invisible art. Every year, they do a panel of the Academy Award nominated editors, and it's called Invisible Art, Visible Artists. They actually might do it for other mediums. Mm-hmm. I'm not 100% sure. I know they do it for the editors because that's the one I go through every year. I know they do I know they do other panels of the Oscar nominated people. I don't know if those are also called Invisible Art, Visible Artists. They might be. It might be the whole series. But Dimension 20, I think, was a real once in a lifetime opportunity because of the kind of more prominence of the editing and the direct engagement we were able to have with the fan base through like the Discord and stuff like that. I'm probably never going to have a project in my life like that where people are like, oh, you're the person who did this. I want to engage with you about this stuff, and I want to ask you questions about how you did stuff, and I want to appreciate the stuff that you did. I'm like, that was the real highlight. So much was great about Dimension 20, but that kind of engagement with the fan base was just such a wonderful experience that I expect to never have again. I even had, I went to Long Beach Trans Pride a few months ago. Time is meaningless. And there was someone there working one of the tables, and they had a Hoot Growl sticker on their water bottle. I was like, oh, you're a Dimension 20 fan. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm one of the editors of Dimension 20. And they're like, oh, that's so cool. And they introduced, I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm Noah. And they're like, oh, my God, you're Noah. And I was like, what? It was such a bizarre experience. And, and I got to thank Dimension 20 for what I'm still in the Dropout Discord. I pop in every once in a while, but it's so hard to keep up now. That, especially, like I go in, like they're talking about all these seasons. I haven't kept up with watching the show as much as I should. I feel very bad about that. So I'm like, I got nothing to, half plus one, a little more than half these conversations. I got nothing to contribute to them. So it's, I have a hard enough keeping up with my Discords where I know everybody on them.
Yeah, no, we talked about Discords with Aaron as well. It's just so much content flowing from so many different people just trying to ask questions or give their 2 cents. It's crazy.
I kept up with it well when I was on the show. I was pretty active, and I loved fucking with the fans. It was so fun. It was so fun. I would take screenshots of their fan theories, the ones that were like incredibly correct or like so laughably incorrect, like a complete 180 from what ends up happening. Mm-hmm. And I would reshare them down the road and be like, hey, so and so perfectly guessed this, or so and so was like just so off the mark. People would get, at the end of the day, they throw so many things out there that like some of them have got, it's monkeys with typewriters, not the theory of monkeys. Our fans are not monkeys. They do have typewriters though. But like one of my favorite things was, because, and I know Aaron brought this up, we split the 16th episode because it was just, a fantasy high because it was so big. And the show had already been announced as being 16 episodes. And I took very special care to never refer to it as the 16th episode. I would always say the last episode or the finale or that. And because my policy is I'm going to fuck with you, I will misdirect you, but I will never outright lie. and so then they're like, I'm like, you go say any point in time when I said there's 16 episodes. And I think I said times like, oh yeah, we plan, the season is planned for 16 episodes or stuff. I would say stuff like that. I never told an outright lie. And being able to watch people's reactions, when that episode dropped and ended with that to be continued on that, that Alley Nat 20 was, that was so cool. Being on the other side of and watching that come out was, and stuff like, like on, A Crown of Candy, watching everyone, talk about certain characters, I'm not going to give any Crown of Candy spoilers, but like knowing who would turn out to do what or what would happen to certain people and be like, oh, I'm so sorry, you're so happy about this thing right now, but you won't be exactly. In a little bit. You won't be.
Yeah, I'm currently like, I have somebody in one of my Discords just like coming into the Dimension 20 as a new person. Everyone's just like, oh, we can't wait till his heart's broken. Like, we're just waiting for it all to happen to him. It is a fun experience.
Yeah, I've had a few people message me that be like, oh, I'm just getting into Dimension 20. And, like, I think someone another editor friend of mine messaged me. He's like, because I kept getting recommended Bill Seacaster clips on YouTube. And he's like, I gotta watch this show. And some people will message me about my Actually appearance and be like, whoa, I just saw you on Actually.
Nice.
What is going on? which once again a weird, neat experience I got to have in my time at College Humor.
Oh yeah, it seems like a blast. But you keep talking about like kind of this keep moving forward. What is the goal that you're trying to reach right now?
Right now, I'm focusing on television comedy, which is something I wasn't even my goal when I started at College Humor. Wasn't my goal when I worked on Comedy Central stuff. Wasn't my goal when I worked at a stand-up comedy label, which says something, right? It just I had a point in time where I kind of was trying. I was like, I got to figure out what I want to specifically go for, and I was like, and I think a big catalyst was someone who had moved new to Los Angeles that I had met, and we're getting on. She messaged me on Facebook kind of out of the blue, and she's like, hey, if you could cut any show past present, what would it be? And like my first thought, the first thing that popped in my mind was 30 Rock. I was like, no, I can think of something better. Let me think on that. And I was like, why am I ignoring that first, it's almost like those tests, where you just get a bunch of questions really fast. And you say the first thing. I was like, oh, that was the first thing that came to mind. Why? Maybe I should examine that. And I look, and it's just like the way, especially 30 Rock, the way editing really plays such a prominent role in comedy and pacing. And you manipulate performance and drama, obviously, but the way you do it in comedy is such a less invisible part of the process. So much more, playing with that. And then I looked, I'm like, I'm currently working at College Humor.
Mm-hmm.
I worked for Comedy Central. I worked for a stand-up comedy label. I'm like, oh shit, maybe there's something here. Maybe it's similarly like when I first got into film, I took film in high school just because I liked the teacher. I was, the teacher whose classroom we hung out in like lunch and recess and stuff. And I just wanted to take a class with him, so I took film. I was like, oh, I remember writing a screenplay with my best friend in elementary school, and we went out to like the corn maze and we filmed like a horror movie in there. Just of us, and I was like, oh shit, I've been doing, I had the Lego stop motion kit when I was a kid. I didn't do a ton with it, but I had it.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, and there was a similar thing. I'm like, oh, this is something I've been into this whole time, but I never really connected the through line.
Mm-hmm. And
so that was, I'm like, oh, and I unfortunately I don't think there's a ton of great comedy movies right now where it's just not the time. The mid-budget movies are very much in decline for a lot of reasons. The movies need to go a lot broader because of the way box office works now. They need to do big, but television is really where the great comedy is now. So I really I decided to focus on that. I was like, and I and one of the things when I started focusing on freelance, I started setting like annual goals. So like last year, my goal was get in the union and work on shows in Avid, which is, I didn't have as much experience with, I've done a lot of stuff in Premiere, but Avid is really the main one used in these bigger shows. And I managed to do both of them like right away, which is wild. March right after I overlapped a little bit. Like as we were wrapping out of A Crown of Candy, I started working on this show, and it was an Avid show. And they're like, oh yeah, we'll teach you how to use Avid. Sure. Which I got through one of the old assistant editors who had left College Humor, was working at this company, and she was there because of when Brittany, the assistant editor who referred me, left. She worked there, so these chains of connections I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And just like Viacom, I've passed other people there. A friend of mine is now, he's got his first he's editing a investigation discovery at that show at that company, and I got him in there while I was there. So it's this always paying it forward. And so I was on that for a few weeks. This Avid documentary series that's probably dead in the water because it was about the Olympics. It was really cool. It was about refugee Olympic athletes, which it was really fascinating. I was really enjoying it. But then I left that, and then I got it was a premiere show, but it was this 11-month union show, which was Last Chance U Basketball for Netflix. And so I was on that for 11 months. I don't think it was supposed to be that long, but COVID really, changed things. And that was a really cool experience. And then, I wrapped that at the beginning of this year. So that was, those both happened in like March, and I was on that into January of this year. And my goals this year was focusing on like broadcast, or at least, not, it's tough because like this kind of was a conversation recently, like digital versus broadcast. It's like, well, Netflix is digital, but I don't consider that the same as doing, like College Humor and Comedy Central YouTube stuff. Even though College Humor has a streaming platform, has Dropout, but it's like there's I guess there's digital, streaming, and broadcast. Maybe would be the three categories. But my goals were like broadcast stuff, or like bigger network stuff, that I could put on my resume, and then working on scripted and comedy stuff. And the first show I got, like I said, like a month after I wrapped out of Last Chance U, was I got hired onto a stop motion show for Stupid Buddy Studios, which is the company that does Robot Chicken. I got referred to that through a friend of mine who had just started on Robot Chicken. And I was on this new show they're doing called Ultra City Smiths, which is this really weird stop motion. It's from Steve Conrad, who did Patriot, which is an Amazon Prime show, which is absolutely fantastic. I highly recommend it. And Perpetual Grace Limited, which is on Epix, so nobody's seen it. But he's this really he writes like Hollywood movies as his day job, and then does really weird TV shows. It's like he doesn't have to care how successful they are, because he's like writing like Secret Life of Walter Mitty and like Wonderland or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so he just does this. He's the type of writer or auteur that like either you connect with his sensibilities and you love it, or you don't and you're going to hate it. Which I kind of love, talking about broad audience stuff. I was just saying, I mean, like he's hitting a certain type of person that clicks with him, and he does not care if it doesn't. So, and it clicked with me, especially Patriot and Ultra City Smiths both really clicked with me. It's this weird, it's this stop motion, like really noir detective story in the city where all the characters are like baby dolls, kind of like they're investigating the murder of this missing millionaire, and this cop with he's got an addiction to limes. He's voiced by Jimmy Simpson. He's the new kid off the turnip truck in this big city investigating this disappearance. And it's all these weird characters. Like John C. Reilly plays like the guy's son, and he's Disco Donovan Smith, and he's never seen a movie that's not porn in his entire life. And it had just such an incredible cast of people like Tim Meadows, who I've always said, as long as Tim Meadows is on television, I'm happy, and I got to play a part in that. Tim Meadows, Tim Heidecker, Aaliyah Shawkat, BB Newirth, who I never realized I really wanted to work on a show with. I was like, until I realized she was on this show, I was like, holy shit. Dak Shepard, Kristen Bell, just an all-star cast. And that was anyway, the point being, that was a scripted comedy show. I really enjoyed I spent 6 months on that show, and it was a really tough show, but it was a really fascinating time. But that was a scripted comedy, and it was for AMC. So I was like, cool. Once again, right out the gate, that was like February. I was like, well, there's my goals for the year.
Yeah.
It was for AMC Plus, which is AMC's streaming network, but then they rebroadcast it on the linear, what's it called, on AMC proper.
Yeah.
And then I actually left that a little early to come on to Adam Conover's show, which is for Netflix. That was Back to Union. They brought me on because they were just being overwhelmed. They needed to bring on another assistant editor, another editor. And then I left that a little early, which is an unfortunate thing. And I hate leaving shows early, but it's just like shows don't care about your schedule. And at the end of the day, like you gotta take what you gotta take. I just started. I'm a few weeks into a new show for Peacock. So NBC Universal, and if you want to be doing television comedy, like NBC is the place to be. And there's a new show called Killing It, starring Craig Robinson. And it's co-created by Dan Gore, one of the co-creators of Brooklyn Nine-Nine, who wrote for 30 Rock. So, I'm like, there we go. I'm on the right, I'm going in the right direction. Things are working out pretty well for me on that. So I've been on that, and this is by far the biggest show I've ever worked on. And I probably wouldn't have gotten it if not for the labor surplus or the job surplus. I got to be honest, it's I'm swinging a little above my work experience right now, but I'm doing it. It is an Avid show. The G Word Adam Conover show was an Avid show. Both these shows that were probably willing to accept my lower level of Avid experience because they needed people. But at the end of the day, I'm going to come out the other end, regardless of how much Avid experience I'm going into these shows with. I'm going to be coming out having done these shows, and I'm feeling really confident that I won't, that now I won't need that kind of boost from the job surplus, and I will be at the rising tide. Lifts all ships. Is like it may get me in the door, but once I'm that high, regardless of when the tide drops. I made it up here. I've reached the checkpoints. So I'm really, I'm figuring out what my goals are going to be for next year. I feel more pressure now that I've like nailed these 2 for 2. I'm like, oh God, well, what's a goal that I can actually hit? But like, I don't want to like lowball myself, but I also don't want to like over. I'm like, okay, what am I going to do? What's 2022 going to be for me?
Yeah.
I don't know. Work on a show that I don't have to pitch to people every time I talk about it.
No, because then you have that's mainstream, and then what are you doing there?
Well, that's like when I was at Viacom. Like, even though like every time I was like, okay, so I have you spiel every time. Like I'm at Viacom, but in their digital department, we do this content. I gave you guys. Even when I was at Dropout, Dropout, it's College Humor Stream. I'm doing a D&D show, and this,
Yeah.
And killing it. Well, even though it's no one knows what it is yet because it's just reported in the trades. We'll see come like next February, April. I hopefully won't have to pitch it anymore. But now I'm like, oh yes, the show from these people starring these people about this thing. Right. There's definitely, I feel like a nice thing of or even my friend who was on Robot Chicken. I just told her about she's looking for her next, and Robot Chicken was a big break for her. So she's like, oh, I peaked. She doesn't have to. She's like, I didn't have to tell anyone what my job was. I'm an assistant editor on Robot Chicken. Boom, done. Get out of there. It's a very nice when that happens. And you're like, I don't have to explain anything. Especially you go to meetup, you go hang out with a bunch of post people, people. And it's like we talk about work a lot. We talk about work so much, and you give the spiel a lot, and you get and it simultaneously can be a little more concise because they know the industry, but at the same time you got to go a little more detailed because they know the industry. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I wouldn't trade it for anything at the end of the day. I love what I'm doing. I love that, I have a habit. My partner hates it, but like every time a trailer for something comes, I'm like, oh, I know someone working on that. Oh, I know someone working on that. I find it very validating. Like, oh, I'm running in the right, right. This isn't my accomplishment. Other people's accomplishments, people that I know's accomplishments. Like, yeah, oh, man, I know someone working. I know an assistant editor on Shang-Chi and The Mandalorian, and like, how freaking cool is that? Wanda. I know people worked on like WandaVision and Loki, and like, I can't throw a stone without hitting a show that someone I know worked on.
That really goes to show like you are surrounding yourself with the people who are making you successful. So like, even listening to this podcast and being like, I don't know any of what's happening. You've got people around you who are supporting you and who are helping you reach your goals. So although you are setting these lofty goals, like, you are doing all of the extra work and preparation by keeping these connections and understanding what you want to do and how you're going to get there, and that you're reaching out to people who also think the same way.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a lot of organic, like I'm not networking with these people. Like I'm just meeting them.
Right.
I'm, but like, I think a big thing for me that's been a bar for my, how successful I feel is there's an event done every year by the American Cinema Editors. They're a prestige organization. You'll see after people's names ACE, for editors, that they're in American Cinema Editors. And they do an event every year. And it used to be at the Disney a lot. It's online now, obviously, called Edit Fest. And it's, a big thing. It's an all-day thing. And they do panels and stuff like that. It's really cool. It's a really wonderful, inspiring experience. It's a great chance to meet a lot of these big people. And I went to my first one the day after I moved to Los Angeles. I moved to Los Angeles like a month or two earlier than I planned because like I had a job opportunity, I had a lead on an apartment. I was like, oh, should I just go now? And then this thing was like that. I planned to go that weekend, and then I saw there's this thing called Edit Fest. The weekend I moved down, I was like, oh, that's my sign. And I drove, and so I moved down and I go to Edit Fest, and I see all these people kind of converging in groups. People see each other and they know each other and they wave and they call and they're clustering together. And I'm very much this outsider. Like I don't know anyone there. I'm just kind of watching, And I did actually end up having a person recognize me from the internet, and they're like, "Hey, Noah," and like, so I did know someone there. Even then, not, but I still I was like watching all these people, these communities and stuff. And I've gone every year since I moved out. I've been in Los Angeles six years, and I moved down in 2015. I've gone every year, and I've gradually seen myself shift from, across that barrier. I go to Edit Fest now, and I know so many people there, and people come up to me, and I go up to people, and people introduce me to other people, and people introduce themselves to me. I mean, Brittany, who I was just talking about, the assistant editor at College Humor, mm-hmm. She introduced herself to me at Edit Fest. She knew who I was from, internet interactions, and she's like, oh, I've been wanting to meet you and talk to you. And she introduced herself to me. And so watching that transition, that's to me, that arc is the thing I kind of keep my eye on of what makes me feel so like validated in this industry and what I'm doing, like that I have a place here, is that now I'm in those inner circles when I go to EditFest, which I the last 2 years have been online. It's been a very cool experience, but it's not the same. Mm-hmm. So I eagerly look forward to the next time, I get to do that. And that'll be, that's my Christmas every year is EditFest.
It's your litmus test.
And it'll be so good. Yeah. Yeah.
Because you started from, day one. And that's wild. That's
exactly.
a really cool, I like that in your life story. That's really fucking cool.
Yeah, so I've advocated. I work with a post production nonprofit called Blue Collar Post Collective, and one of our big things is we send people to events and stuff, and we fly them out and put them up. And I'm always pushing for us to send as many people as possible to Edit Fest because it's such a cool. I also think it's a lot of people who are like looking at moving to Los Angeles, and so getting that little feet on the ground time in LA is, I think, so valuable for building that confidence and knowing a few, like, oh, I've met people, I've spent FaceTime with people in LA, and demystifying it. Because I moved to LA because a friend of mine moved down a few months before me. I was like, oh, he did it. I can just, and he got me into the building I was in too. So like he got me my apartment because I was in his apartment building. So I love sending people to Edit Fest because it's such a great way to kind of stick your toes into the water of going out to LA.
That's awesome. Alex, do you have any other questions for Noah?
Noah, if you were a D&D class, what would you be?
Bard.
I don't know why I asked.
I
was going to expect any other answer.
Yeah, it's a little. I'd like to say wizard. But the ADHD is too bad to be a wizard. There are no ADHD wizards.
It's too focused. I mean, if that was your focus, if you hyper focused on studying, then yeah. I've never been a hyper focused ADHD person. I am the procrastinate eating and like, well, I get the lose track of time type person. I'm like, oh, let me just finish this thing, but it's not this. I don't think it's the same as hyper focus, right? For me, at least. I don't know.
Noah, do you have any questions before we wrap this up?
No, I wanted to add. So this is I re-listened to Erin's episode last night so I could make sure, to correct her if she got anything wrong, which she didn't because she's fantastic. But there's something that I've like. This was one of the things like, if I was in the conversation, I would have interjected. And she was talking about the bird noises that Brennon recorded for Fantasy High, which was such a, he did like a monkey at one point. He also did the corn cutie sound, by the way, was Brennon, because we didn't have anything. And I reused those. I won't even say, I reused that sound in a sketch that I cut. In a College Humor original sketch, there is the sound of Brennon's corn cuties. I challenge someone to find it. And if they do, I have no rewards to get, but they will have found it. But another thing he recorded in that session, the thing that I really wish they would release, I think I have the file, but he did Bresrar crying, which you can hear some of it in the episode, obviously, because that's why we recorded it. Right. He gets really saying because he says Bresrar starts crying, and we're like, oh, I want to hear that. Like normally we don't do character stuff that's not coming out of their mouths. But right. I really want to hear Bresrar crying. And I use a relatively mellow take of Bresrar crying, but Brennon goes pretty hard on that in that recording file, and it is truly one of the funniest things. And because he starts just bawling and full body weeping as Bresrar. Turns into Mario for a little bit too, and it's just this. It is, I can't even do it justice, but it's so good. They released the Bresrar cut. Sam Reich, go release the audio of Brennon crying as Bresrar to the fandom, please, because it's fantastic.
I'm sure you could just release like little clips of him taking all those, but like just the bird clips, and put that on like. Well, okay, I won't say that, but like OnlyFans, like
put it on Daily Motion. Put it on Live Leaks.
Yeah.
Put it on OnlyFans. Is that what you said?
Yes. Just Brennon noises for OnlyFans.
I would make so much money. Are you kidding me? And then also like we talked about how we cut as little content as possible. And I'm sure I've said this other places, but the one episode, the one noteworthy time when I cut a significant amount of content is how do I say it? In Crown of episode 6 in A Crown of Candy, the fight. I cut about 45 minutes out of that episode of silence.
Oh.
Because that was the big fight after that big kind of first act twist, and the players were just so shocked and so stunned and afraid to do the wrong thing, and their turns took so long as they were just like, what? Or just Murph just sits there and just stares at the board, just and so I had to tighten up their turns so much in order to get that episode to play. And by the end of it, between what they recorded and what the episode was, it's about a 45-minute difference.
Oh my goodness!
Which unprecedented in my time on Dimension 20. And it just and people, I think someone once said like release just a string out of just that 45 minutes of just them, not just a supercut of just them doing nothing for 45 minutes, which is a pretty great
I'm
idea.
going back to the OnlyFans. Release that on the OnlyFans.
Going back to the
Pay per
OnlyFans,
video.
just each cut as a separate video, and then you can string it together into your own supercut. Yeah, I don't need to work anymore. I just gotta release behind the scenes Dimension 20 content.
You're welcome. I'll take my cut at any time.
Cut a few, a few cut jokes here and there, because we do cut some jokes, not a ton.
Yeah.
There's like there was one joke I remember, like someone said, and you could tell like that you could see that they thought of it and they were reluctant to say it on set, and then Brennon was like, go on, because they were in the middle of this in this scene. He was like, well, come on, and in character nudged them on to do it, and they said it, and it is a funny joke, but and we got into the edit, and Brennon was like, let's nix this joke. You can tell they don't want to say it. It's more, it was just a kind of uncomfortable joke.
Right.
Like it wasn't like offensive or anything. It was just like, and so every once in a while we cut some jokes here and there, but we really try and keep as much as we can in that show.
Gotcha. That's amazing. Where can people, I guess, find you, socials and stuff like that?
I'm on Twitter. I post weird thoughts every now and then. I have to double check what my handle even is. I think it's HD Noah is my Twitter. I am on Instagram. I post there even less frequently, but there's lots of pictures of my cats and my plants. So that's a nice thing, and that's N to the D to the S, because I truly could not think of anything else at the time.
Amazing.
And I'll spell out no numbers, no Fast and Furious bullshit. N to the D to the S. Those are the main places. My Facebook is more professional, more personal, professional, like kind of less public facing. So I'm on LinkedIn. Follow me on LinkedIn. I don't know, is that a thing people promote?
They do now.
Well, then they just have to reach out to you and have that first foot in the door.
Yeah,
and then
exactly. And of course, subscribe to my OnlyFans, where I'll be releasing hot exclusive Brendan Lee Mulligan content every week.
I think I actually would, though. Like, I don't do anything on OnlyFans, but I think that would be the one that would get me on there.
I'm trying to think of a really good fantasy high pun of OnlyFans, and nothing's coming to mind, and I feel so disappointed in myself because I'm normally the pun guy.
It's gonna be 3:00 in the morning, and you're gonna remember.
I'll email you. I'll be like, look, here it is. It's only fawns. I don't know. That's nothing.
We'll get there.
Orky fans. They're getting worse. I'm afraid to say a third one.
I can't even think of anything right now.
Yeah, no, it's a tough one to pun. It's a tough one to do a pun on. Now I'm imagining OnlyFans in the Unsleeping City. There's something there. There's something there.
Definitely.
We couldn't make it through one episode where we didn't spiral out of control and doing something crazy, Adrian. I don't.
Well, that's just our bread. It just happens.
Well, I mean, what does control look like?
You know what? I take that back. You're right.
Hi, this is my question. Hello, this is my answer. Okay. Like, that's boring, right?
Instead, we're going to talk about Elf OnlyFans. Well, Elf would kill it on OnlyFans.
Of course.
Oh,
because all the people who love Elf would be...
Let's be honest. In real life, I guarantee there's a huge Elf market on OnlyFans.
I mean, yes.
100%. In reality, there's probably a slew of money-making Elf content.
I know one. I'm sorry.
He is one.
Adrian, but probably not enough work.
Not enough work. No. But that means someone needs to fill that market.
There's a niche waiting to be filled.
Honestly, there's probably more than we expect. Let's be honest. We're probably underselling the amount of OnlyFans content.
Yeah, we just haven't gone down that rabbit hole. We've been busy. Thank you so much, Noah. This is awesome, amazing.
Yeah, I'm glad we after months of trying to get this to happen, I'm glad it finally came together. This was fantastic, and the timing worked out great for me. So yeah, thanks so much.
Of course, no, thank you. And Alex,
thank you, dear listener, for joining us for another episode of Dungeons and Degrees. find us where pods are cast. Like, subscribe, share with your family. Please get the word out so we can continue to make content like this. If that's not enough for you, please join us on our Patreon. We have pencils to give out. So if anything, you just need a pencil, you can get one from us. Once again, thank you for listening to our episode.
Yeah, also cut stuff as well.
Well, yeah, there's cuts and stuff too, but like pencils.
What level spell slot do you use to cast this pod?
Ooh. You know what? Since it was like mid-pandemic, I'd say it's only about a level 2.
Okay, that's pretty good for a level 2 spell slot.
Yeah, we're getting to bigger things. Like, we don't know what the upcast looks like, but we're working on it.
It's the best homebrew.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much. My name's Adrian.
And I'm Alex.
And I'm Noah.
Go have some fun.